Before we dive into this wild ride, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Maybe it's a cozy village in England, a bustling high-rise in Tokyo, or a sunny beachside town in Australia. I love hearing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can travel. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the suburban street, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and pristine white fences. The hum of sprinklers and distant lawnmowers filled the air, masking the low thrum of tension building in my chest. My black sedan sat in the driveway, trunk wide open as I hauled out a large cardboard box. The smell of fresh asphalt mixed with the faint scent of warm grass, but I hardly noticed. Across the street, two figures appeared on the porch of the house with the blue shutters and the flower beds that always seemed too perfect. Rachel and Lauren, the infamous sisters who had already earned a reputation for turning minor neighborhood annoyances into full-blown dramas, were both standing with hands on their hips, eyes narrowed, their expressions sharp and predatory. Rachel in her bright yellow floral sundress, her blonde curls bouncing as she leaned forward, squinted at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. Lauren, wearing a similarly styled blue sundress, mirrored her sister's posture, arms folded, lips pursed, watching my every movement like a hawk. Both were 40, heavy-set, their presence dominating the otherwise serene street. I tried to ignore them, thinking perhaps it was merely curiosity. But something about the way Rachel tilted her head and whispered into Lauren's ear suggested calculation rather than idle interest. I set the box down in the garage and wiped sweat from my brow, only to feel their gazes burning through me, dissecting every move, as though they were already plotting my downfall. The first words came like a thunderclap. "What exactly are you hiding in that trunk?" Rachel's voice pierced the summer air, sharp and accusatory. I froze, hands mid-wipe on the cardboard box, and turned toward her. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my tone light but firm. Lauren chimed in, leaning slightly forward, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "You've been carrying things at all hours, strange hours. Heavy things, wrapped things. Something dangerous, maybe." Their combined energy felt almost tangible, a pressure on my chest that tightened with every syllable. I shook my head, forcing a small laugh, though it did little to alleviate the knot forming in my stomach. "Tools, lawn supplies, boxes," I said. "Nothing you should be worrying about." Rachel snorted, stepping closer to the edge of the curb, her eyes narrowing. "Convenient," she said, emphasizing the word as though it carried some secret accusation I wasn't privy to. Lauren leaned in, nodding along, adding, "We're not accusing, we're just concerned. People around here need to be safe." Concern. The word felt like a trap, a weapon disguised in politeness. I could see the calculations behind their expressions, the way they had already decided I was the villain in their imaginary story. I should have walked away, closed the trunk, and retreated to safety, but a spark of stubbornness flared. I squared my shoulders, hands on my hips. "There's nothing in that trunk," I said, voice steady despite the unease clawing at me. "Absolutely nothing." Lauren's eyes widened just slightly, a flicker of satisfaction passing over her face. Rachel tilted her head, lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're calling the police," Rachel announced, pulling out her phone as if the threat alone could already seal my guilt. I blinked, processing the absurdity. "You're what?" I asked, incredulous. "Because I have boxes in my trunk." Lauren leaned forward, almost theatrically, whispering, "You don't understand. We saw something. Something moved." The hairs on my neck prickled. Something moved? In the trunk? My mind raced, thinking of every conceivable item I'd packed, every shadow, every rolled-up tarp. But nothing. There was nothing unusual, nothing sinister. And yet, standing there, facing these two women, I felt like I was already losing a battle I didn't know had begun. By the next evening, the escalation became undeniable. I returned from work, the weight of exhaustion heavy on my shoulders, only to find Rachel and Lauren in the street, gesturing wildly, their voices carrying across the block. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, drawn by the spectacle, and I could feel the weight of their collective attention pressing in, suffocating. "Open it," Rachel shouted, pointing directly at my sedan. Lauren's voice rose in chorus, urgent and sharp. "We need to see inside. You're hiding something." My stomach sank, every instinct screaming at me to shut the trunk, retreat, and avoid confrontation. But pride and disbelief anchored me in place. "I'm not hiding anything," I said firmly, though my voice felt small against their fury. "There's nothing in there." Still, they were relentless. Rachel leaned toward me, her expression a mixture of rage and triumph, as if she had already solved the mystery. "We know you moved it," she accused. "You're trying to play us, but we're not fools." Lauren added a flourish of nods and whispered conspiratorial affirmations. My pulse hammered. I realized then that no amount of reasoning would penetrate the fortress of their certainty. Their world was self-constructed, and in it I was guilty before evidence, before proof, before logic. I closed the trunk slowly, the metal latch clicking ominously in the quiet evening air, but the sisters were not satisfied. Their voices lingered, echoing in the street even as I stepped back inside. Across the neighborhood, a few curtains twitched, hinting at the silent audience now invested in their narrative. Later that night, a more formal confrontation arrived. The flashing blue and red lights outside my house shattered any illusion of normalcy. Two police officers, one older with a weathered, serious expression, and one younger, stiff and alert, approached my driveway. Rachel and Lauren stood across the street, faces flushed with excitement and vindication, pointing emphatically at my trunk. "We're concerned for safety," Rachel announced, as if rehearsing her lines. Lauren nodded, eyes wide, clutching her phone. I felt my pulse spike, the streetlights reflecting off the asphalt in a way that made the trunk's contents seem more sinister than they actually were. The older officer's voice was calm but firm. "Sir, we received a report about suspicious activity concerning your vehicle. We need to inspect the trunk." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to resist. But I complied, unlocking the trunk to reveal its mundane contents: bags, boxes, a roll tarp, tools. The officers examined it thoroughly, then looked at me with a mixture of relief and restrained disbelief. Rachel and Lauren, however, refused to concede. "You didn't check properly," Rachel insisted. "He probably moved it. There's something else," Lauren echoed, whispering accusations under her breath, maintaining the narrative even in the face of contrary evidence. When the officers finally left, their vehicle's lights fading down the street, I closed the trunk once more. My heart still raced, the adrenaline leaving a tremor in my hands. Across the street, Rachel and Lauren retreated into their house, but their eyes lingered on me through the window panes, sharp and unyielding. The message was clear. This was not over. Their obsession had only intensified, and my ordinary life had been dragged into a theater of accusation and hysteria I hadn't asked to join. I leaned against the hood of my car, exhaling slowly, realizing that even though the immediate threat had passed, the battle for truth, for my reputation, and for my sanity was only beginning. Somewhere in the darkened corners of that neighborhood, the sisters were already plotting the next move, and I knew that when it came, nothing would be ordinary again. The night settled in with an uneasy quiet, the kind that presses in and whispers possibilities. From my vantage point, I could see the soft glow of Rachel and Lauren's porch light, the silhouettes of neighbors' curtains, and the looming presence of suspicion that had now embedded itself into every corner of my world. The street was silent, yet charged, holding its collective breath for what was to come. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my thoughts, and the question echoed relentlessly in my mind. How far would they go, and how much longer could I endure this calculated madness? The answer, I feared, was something I was about to find out. The next morning, the street felt heavier, almost charged with anticipation. I stepped out of my house, coffee in hand, only to see Rachel and Lauren already stationed on their porch, arms crossed, glaring across the pavement like sentinels on duty. Rachel's yellow sundress caught the sun, bright and blinding, her blonde curls bouncing as she leaned forward, her eyes locked on me with unmistakable intensity. Lauren, in her blue sundress, mirrored her sister's posture, lips pursed and eyes narrowed, her phone already clutched in hand as though documenting the scene before it even began. I tried to keep my gaze forward, pretending the morning light, the birds, and the faint hum of sprinklers were all I noticed. But even from 50 feet away, I could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent accusation carried in every stiff movement, every whispered exchange. I opened the trunk, checking the contents again, a tarp, a box of tools, a couple of grocery bags. But the act itself seemed to fuel their obsession rather than satisfy it. Rachel raised her voice immediately, sharp and accusatory. "See, he's moving things again. He's hiding it." Lauren nodded frantically, whispering conspiratorially, documenting every second with her phone. Neighbors peeked through blinds, curiosity mixed with disbelief on their faces. I realized that no matter how transparent I tried to be, their narrative had already taken hold. Reason and explanation were irrelevant. I had become a character in a story they were writing, a villain in their own moral play, and nothing I did could alter the script. I tried a peaceful approach, speaking directly to them. "Look, there's nothing dangerous in here. You're making a mountain out of a molehill," I said, gesturing toward the trunk. My voice was calm, even though the tension in my chest was like a coiled spring. Rachel scoffed, stepping closer to the curb, her eyes gleaming with righteous indignation. "We're just trying to protect the neighborhood," she said, but the tone betrayed the thrill she got from playing detective, from imagining herself a hero exposing hidden evil. Lauren nodded vigorously, her phone raised as if to catch every flinch, every flicker of doubt that might prove my guilt. It wasn't protection. They wanted spectacle. And I was now the unwilling star of their drama. By midweek, their tactics had escalated beyond mere yelling. They began trailing me when I left the house, appearing in parking lots or near grocery stores, sometimes crouched behind hedges with binoculars. I spotted Lauren once crouched beside a mailbox, whispering urgently to Rachel on her phone, both of them trying to keep their large frames hidden as if stealth were possible with such conspicuous silhouettes. Every movement I made felt scrutinized, every glance suspicious. The neighborhood's quiet familiarity had been replaced with a constant, oppressive gaze that left me on edge, anticipating confrontation at every turn. Even my closest neighbors began avoiding eye contact. Their own suspicion, seated by the sisters, whispered warnings and dramatized tales. One afternoon, their harassment reached a new level of audacity. I had parked near the curb, unloading bags of groceries, when I noticed Rachel and Lauren approaching, phones out, expressions triumphant. Rachel shouted, pointing directly at me. "There it is. That's him. What's he hiding now?" Lauren chimed in, narrating every action with melodramatic flair, drawing the attention of passers-by. The embarrassment was immediate and intense. Heads turned, whispers spread, and I felt the heat rise to my face. I wanted to retreat, to avoid escalating, but the sisters had cornered me in my own driveway, leaving no space to maneuver without appearing guilty. Their strategy was simple and cruel: make the ordinary extraordinary, the mundane suspicious, and use the public eye as their weapon. The following evening, I returned home to find their white SUV parked across my driveway, blocking me completely. The street, usually quiet, had grown thick with onlookers, neighbors drawn out of curiosity or concern, all staring as Rachel and Lauren stood proudly, arms crossed, their triumphant glares daring me to act. My pulse quickened, and I took a deep breath. Calling a tow truck might have seemed like the logical solution, but the sisters had already framed me as reactive, aggressive, and guilty. Any action on my part could be twisted, documented, and weaponized against me. I knew I needed a smarter approach, something that would not only protect me, but also turn their own obsession into leverage. That night, sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, every distant bark sent my heart racing. I rechecked locks, secured the garage, and even set up a small camera near the front window. Watching the playback later, I saw them circling, whispering, documenting everything. They weren't just curious, they were orchestrating a narrative, a performance meant to vilify me in the eyes of anyone watching. I realized that to end this harassment, I would have to outsmart them, use their predictability and arrogance against them, and carefully plan my next move. Direct confrontation had failed, logic had failed. Now only strategy remained. The breakthrough came when I noticed a pattern. Rachel and Lauren thrived on spectacle, on public drama, on the illusion of catching me in wrongdoing. If I could stage a scenario that appeared chaotic and incriminating but was entirely harmless, and ensure it was captured for others to see, I could finally expose their obsession and the absurdity of their accusations. I began to plan meticulously, recording my own evidence, documenting the harassment, and preparing subtle traps that would leverage their own pride against them. Every interaction, every accusation, was cataloged and analyzed. Their obsession with appearances, their need to be right, was the weakness I could exploit. The tension reached a boiling point when the sisters decided to escalate once more. One late afternoon, they cornered me at the corner of the street, pointing fingers, waving phones, shouting about the trunk, as if it held some terrible secret. I stood my ground, calm and measured, noting each motion, each word, each flourish designed to dramatize and provoke. I realized that their plan was to continue amplifying suspicion, each act building toward a crescendo of fear, isolation, and humiliation. But I had anticipated this. I had the tools, the documentation, the knowledge of their predictable obsession. The stage was set for a counterstrike, subtle but decisive. Before nightfall, I began preparing the first step. I adjusted the trunk slightly, arranging harmless items to create the illusion of movement while remaining perfectly safe. Every motion was calculated, designed to feed the sisters' paranoia while remaining under my control. I double-checked cameras, confirmed angles, and set the lighting to ensure clarity. The street, once ordinary, now felt like a stage, the suburban houses framing the drama with an almost cinematic perfection. Rachel and Lauren, oblivious to the trap, were already planning their next accusation, their minds racing with imagined evidence that didn't exist. Their arrogance, their greed for attention, and their compulsion to dominate the narrative were all pieces I could use. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street, I stepped back and watched. The sisters would approach, predictably, theatrically, and begin documenting. Neighbors would glance curiously, drawn by the commotion, while I remained composed, observing and recording. Everything was in place: the cameras, the positioning, the props, the schedule. The tension was nearly unbearable, but I knew this was necessary. They had pushed me too far, dragged my life into a stage of absurd accusations, and it was time to turn the tables. With patience, timing, and precision, the next encounter would finally allow the narrative to shift. That night, as shadows lengthened and the street grew quiet except for the distant hum of traffic, I sat in my living room, reviewing the camera angles, confirming the sequence of events, mentally rehearsing the encounter. Rachel and Lauren were not merely antagonists. They were predictable, theatrical, and utterly convinced of their righteousness. Their obsession was a weapon I could harness. And as the street settled into uneasy silence, I felt a surge of resolve. The stage was ready. The trap was set. And soon, very soon, the narrative that had consumed my life would finally tilt in my favor, forcing the sisters to confront the consequences of their own arrogance and obsession. The morning air carried a tension that felt almost tangible, thick with expectation and the faint scent of freshly cut grass. I stepped out of my house, surveying the street with a careful, calculating gaze. Rachel and Lauren were already on their porch, practically vibrating with anticipation, phones clutched in hand, eyes sharp and predatory. Rachel's yellow floral sundress glowed in the sun, her curls framing a face twisted with righteous certainty. Lauren, in her blue sundress, mirrored her sister's posture, lips pressed tightly, ready to narrate every second of the drama to an invisible audience. Their presence dominated the street as always, but today I felt a quiet confidence beneath the lingering tension. Today, the tables were about to turn. I opened the trunk slowly, deliberately, revealing the same ordinary contents as always: boxes, bags, and a folded tarp, but strategically positioned to create subtle movement when the wind caught them. I knew their eyes would catch every shift, every shadow, interpreting it through a lens of paranoia I had carefully studied. Rachel gasped, a sharp intake of breath that carried across the street, while Lauren's eyes widened, phone raised, recording with meticulous precision. "See, it's moving," Rachel shrieked, pointing at the trunk as if proof of my guilt had suddenly materialized. Lauren nodded violently, narrating the scene in an exaggerated whisper, drawing the attention of neighbors who had begun gathering along the sidewalks, curious and wide-eyed. The performance they had sought for weeks was finally in place, and it was under my control. As the sisters leaned closer, fully convinced that they were witnessing the culmination of some hidden crime, I stayed calm, hands loosely at my sides, maintaining a posture of quiet authority. My heart still raced, but the fear that had dominated me for days had transformed into focused determination. Every step, every glance had been anticipated, rehearsed mentally like a chess match. I could see their minds working, their greed for drama blinding them to reality. The wind shifted, moving a corner of the tarp slightly, and Rachel shrieked again, voice rising in pitch as if the moment were ordained. Lauren's narration became frantic, punctuated with exaggerated gestures and gasps, her entire body leaning forward, as though physically trying to extract confession from me. Neighbors watched from behind partially drawn curtains, some whispering to each other, others leaning forward, captivated by the spectacle. The absurdity of the situation hung in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife, but the sisters were too invested in their narrative to notice. Their arrogance, their need to be right, their obsession with appearances, it was all on display, a perfect performance crafted by their own hubris. And as the crowd grew, I allowed a small, controlled smile to appear, knowing that the next few minutes would seal their downfall, without me needing to raise my voice or step outside my carefully measured role. The first officer arrived, summoned by the sisters' frantic calls, their insistence that something dangerous was in the trunk. I had anticipated this perfectly. When he stepped onto the street, the officer's gaze swept the scene, taking in the sisters, the crowd, and finally the trunk. Rachel waved emphatically, narrating wildly, while Lauren tried to interject details, her voice rising with dramatic urgency. The officer approached cautiously, expression professional yet clearly bemused. I stepped forward, gesturing openly. "It's all right, everything in the trunk is harmless. You'll see." With precise timing, I tilted the tarp just enough to shift, creating a convincing but entirely innocuous movement. The sisters reacted instantly. Rachel gasped, leaning forward, pointing, fingers trembling with excitement. Lauren echoed every exclamation, practically bouncing as she captured every reaction on her phone. The officer bent down, inspected the trunk, and carefully lifted the tarp. Boxes, tools, bags, completely ordinary. His eyes flicked toward me, then to the sisters and back again, his expression unreadable, but authoritative. "Nothing illegal here," he said, voice calm but firm. "I suggest you stop making false reports." Rachel opened her mouth to argue, but a single, measured glare from him silenced her. Lauren's fingers froze mid-recording, the realization creeping into her mind that their theatrics had been captured, documented, and now exposed. The crowd murmured, a ripple of disbelief spreading along the street. Neighbors who had been silently observing began whispering to each other, eyes flicking between the sisters and me, seeing the stark contrast between hysteria and composure. Rachel's face fell, shock mixing with indignation as her credibility crumbled in real time. Lauren, pale and frozen, finally lowered her phone, realizing that the moment they had anticipated for weeks had turned against them. Their obsession with narrative, their need to appear righteous, and their complete misreading of reality had led them into a trap they hadn't even suspected existed. I closed the trunk carefully, ensuring the motion was smooth, deliberate, and final. The sisters took a step back, their arrogance fading into stunned silence. Rachel's mouth opened, closed, opened again, words failing her. Lauren looked around, the crowd's shifting attention painfully obvious, faces turning toward them with quiet judgment. I could feel the weight of weeks of tension lifting, replaced by a calm satisfaction. Justice had been served without a single harsh word from me, without confrontation, only through strategy, patience, and an understanding of their weaknesses. In the aftermath, The sisters retreated to their house, faces flushed with humiliation, shoulders tense with unspent fury. Neighbors, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began offering quiet nods and supportive smiles. The street slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, birds resuming their songs, sprinklers humming, and the distant bark of a dog cutting through the calm. I stood for a moment in the driveway, hands on hips, sunlight glinting off the car, savoring the absurdity of events. Rachel and Lauren's obsession had been weaponized against them, their false accusations and public hysteria exposed for all to see. I realized that control had shifted completely. The sisters, who had spent days orchestrating paranoia and suspicion, now had to face the consequences of their own hubris. HOA fines were soon issued for harassment, police warnings became official records, and the neighborhood gossip, once a tool in their hands, turned into a record of their overreach. Every phone video they had recorded, meant to prove my guilt, had instead captured their theatrics and false claims. Karma had arrived in full force, public and undeniable, leaving the sisters isolated in their own narrative, trapped by their obsession and pride. That evening, the street felt quiet in a different way. I could see Rachel and Lauren inside, still whispering to each other, plotting some imagined comeback, unaware that the evidence of their folly had already been disseminated among neighbors and even posted online. I leaned against my car, letting the cool metal steady me, a small smile tugging at my lips. The absurdity of their obsession, the meticulous way they had attempted to control perception, and the sheer theatricality of their accusations made for a story that I knew would be remembered by the neighborhood for months to come. I glanced at the trunk one last time, knowing it held nothing but ordinary items, yet had become the centerpiece of a spectacle that revealed everything about the sisters' true nature. Their need to dominate, to fabricate drama, and to assert moral superiority had blinded them to reason and reality. And in exploiting that blindness, I had not only protected myself, but also orchestrated a resolution that was just satisfying and irreversible. The street was peaceful, the threat dissipated, and the sisters were left to reckon with the public exposure of their own obsession. As twilight settled, casting long shadows across the pavement, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This episode, while exhausting and absurd, had reinforced the power of patience, strategy, and understanding one's adversaries. Rachel and Lauren had been driven by ego and insecurity, and by staying calm and observant, I had transformed their aggression into my advantage. The satisfaction was quiet but profound. Every accusation, every shout, every phone recording intended to incriminate me had instead cemented their downfall. Justice had been exacted not through confrontation, but through foresight, intelligence, and timing. And yet, as the neighborhood settled into its evening rhythm, a lingering awareness remained. Rachel and Lauren, though publicly humiliated, were still the same sisters, still capable of scheming and plotting, still determined to assert their dominance in subtle, insidious ways. I knew that the peace I now enjoyed might not last forever, but for tonight it was absolute. I closed the garage door slowly, the click echoing down the empty street, and stepped back to take in the calm. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the suburban landscape in golden light, a final curtain on a chapter of chaos, accusation, and eventual karma. The sisters' reign of hysteria had been checked, their narrative dismantled, and my sanity preserved, at least for now. The night air carried a quiet satisfaction, tempered with the understanding that vigilance would always be necessary. But the streets were mine again. The lesson was clear. Arrogance and obsession can be turned against their owners when met with patience, strategy, and resolve. Rachel and Lauren had pushed too far, and the payoff had been complete, public, and undeniable. The suburban neighborhood, once a stage for hysteria, had returned to ordinary life, leaving the sisters to stew in their own pride, exposed for all to see. The story was resolved, justice served, and karma had claimed its due.